My name is Nick Bailey. I am the online education manager here at CWEA, and I'll just go ahead and go through a few of our housekeeping slides before I turn it over to Spencer with CASA. Today's webinar is CASA and CWA presents wastewater surveillance, what it is and what matters. It's a live webinar for about an hour or so. That four-digit code, and on the next screen, we'll talk about the process for claiming the contact hours. Your process for claiming contact hours, you'll just need to log into CWA's Owens network or http://owen.cwea.org. Click under the Contents tab. Under that, you'll see an option for the attention check code. You'll need to put in the four-digit code within 48 hours of the live webinar. Once you put that in, all of your contact hours will be reflective in your My CWA account within 2 to 3 weeks. The next slide, we'll talk about handouts for today's webinar. We will have handouts. Those handouts will be shared. And the way that you can access that will be the same tab that you go on to owen.cwea.org. Click under the Contents tab, click under Handouts, and the slides will be there in about 1 or 2 weeks or so after the webinar. You'll receive an email for that. Next slide, we just talk about, it's our general disclaimer just to let you know that this meeting will be recorded and our attendees will receive an email once that recording has been posted to Owen. You'll receive an email to let you know that it's available for you. You'll have 30 days or so to access it from the point that it has been posted. Because this webinar is recorded, I'll just say this, our disclaimer, and won't read through it all. I'll just say for any reporters in the room, all of our speakers are off the record. And we'll go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to Spencer with CASA so he can introduce all of our speakers to us. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Welcome in, everybody. I am very grateful to CWEA for partnering with us on this, and of course to our partners at CDPH. Thank you all for being here. As Nick said, this is the first webinar in our wastewater surveillance webinar series. Our next one will be on April 22nd, and then the third and final in this series will be on May 20th. So I hope that if you are enjoying this one, you would feel free to join us for those as well. I want to just take this opportunity to introduce our speakers. So my name is Spencer Sachs. I am from the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. Up on our speaker dais, we have Guinevere Ellison-Giles from CDPH, Elizabeth Berner from CDPH, Angela Raby, and Stephanie Birch-Murbach. We have a great series of presentations for you all today. As Nick mentioned, the Q&A feature is available. We will be having a portion for questions and answers at the end. So please feel free as questions come up to put them in the Q&A box, and we'd be happy to answer them at the end. And so before we kick it off, I'll just say I hope that you enjoy, and I hope that you learn plenty about wastewater surveillance. And so with that, I will kick it off to Guinevere.
Okay, so this is the agenda for today's meeting, a very broad overview of California wastewater surveillance, what it is, why it works, public health benefits, and then Spencer's going to be speaking more from the CASA perspective about why wastewater surveillance is important for wastewater workers. We'll discuss some resources, and then we will have time for Q&A. So to start, what is wastewater surveillance? Also known as wastewater-based epidemiology, or WBE, it is a type of environmental surveillance that is used for public health, in which wastewater is collected from a treatment plant and is tested for the presence of a particular disease. It's used in conjunction with other disease surveillance systems like clinical or sentinel surveillance, and helps to support or increase our understanding about disease activity in a community. So how does it work? You may already be familiar, but just to start from the same perspective, following the schematic shown here on the screen, we have a community where a few individuals are infected with a pathogen, be virus, bacteria, fungus, etc. These individuals will shed the pathogens through their stool, sputum, urine, or other bodily fluids or secretions into the wastewater, which leaves their house and travels through a network of connected pipes in a sewer shed and gets carried to a wastewater treatment facility. Before the wastewater enters the facility to be treated, a sample is collected, which is then sent to a laboratory and is tested for the presence of that pathogen. The sample is then analyzed, and the results are reported to public health. And we can use that data to make estimates about disease activity in the community. So some benefits of wastewater surveillance are that with a single wastewater sample collected, we can infer information on the presence and circulation of infectious diseases within the entire community living in the sewer shed. Also, since this is collected from a pooled sample from a community, remember wastewater is combined within the sewer shed network, it's anonymous, and it doesn't depend on access to healthcare or testing. And from that one sample, we can test for multiple targets and track multiple infectious diseases, as well as disease subtypes and variants all at the same time. So how did wastewater surveillance start, and where are we now? Wastewater surveillance, as we use it today, really started when the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, established the National Wastewater Surveillance System, or NEWS, in September of 2020, with the goal of developing a surveillance system that would complement existing COVID-19 surveillance and provide insight into community transmission. Additionally, this program would coordinate different wastewater surveillance programs that were already ongoing around the country to expand it, and then to centralize the data into a national database for public health use. Early adopters of this program included 8 states: California, Ohio, North Carolina, South Carolina, Utah, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin. Since then, CDC News has expanded its program to all 50 states and 7 territories, and they're now expanding testing for influenza and its subtypes, RSV, Mpox, measles, and other pathogens. In California, there were a few academic researchers who had started using wastewater surveillance for COVID back in spring of 2020. CDC kicked off its national program in September of that year, and then CDPH joined the CDC's News Network through a small grant in late 2020, which started the CalSewers program. This effort has involved multiple ongoing state collaborations, including the State Water Resources Control Board, as well as with many local public health and academic partners and wastewater utilities. At the start, CDPH began collecting samples from 6 wastewater treatment plants representing 4 counties: 2 in San Francisco County, 2 in Los Angeles County, 1 in Orange County, and 1 in San Diego County. To this day, the same grant program through the CDC News remains our only source of funding. So now, more than 5 years later, we've established our own wastewater analysis laboratory here at the CDPH with the Drinking Water and Radiation Laboratory, sometimes called DWRL, which is a high-throughput environmental lab that processes samples from 34 different sites, including 28 unique wastewater utility sites and 6 sub-sewer sheds. However, the CDPH lab, DWRL, is just one part of a network of multiple laboratories and partnerships that we use to track wastewater across the state. Altogether, we refer to this network of wastewater programs and laboratories as the CalSewers network. In addition to the CDPH lab, this network includes those wastewater sites that participate in the CDC News National Program, sites that participate with our academic partners at Stanford and Emory through their national program called Wastewater Scan. And this network has also started to include data and results from county-led wastewater testing programs in Riverside, Alameda, and San Mateo counties. Through this network, we have a combined total of 85 unique sites that are being monitored directly as a part of our CDPH CalSewers network. This network covers 39 counties and 23 million people, which is about 60% of the population of California. Building this network has been very deliberate, and we have tried hard to focus on where we think wastewater surveillance can help fill needs at the state level, trying to focus on representativeness and equity, balancing major metropolitan areas with low-density rural sites, considering sites that cover low socioeconomic status and high-risk populations, and also thinking about specific use cases for wastewater, such as using it as an early warning system for new pathogens or routine surveillance for common diseases. Additionally, we've been able to expand monitoring of pathogens well beyond COVID-19. Through our CalSewers network, we are able to monitor for SARS-CoV-2, Mpox, Clade 1 and Clade 2, norovirus, influenza A, B, and H5, RSV, measles, West Nile virus, C. auris, and quite a few other additional pathogens through the wastewater scan program. In a few minutes, we'll demonstrate how we share that data and information. So next slide. We're also honored to share that the California Department of Public Health was officially selected as one of 6 national CDC News Centers of Excellence, COE, for wastewater surveillance. This recognition is a reflection of all the hard work and dedication from all of our partners and collaborators. It is a partnership with academic partners Stanford Emory through their wastewater scan program, who focus on wastewater surveillance methodology and advancement in the field, as well as our partnership with San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, CASA, who can help connect and represent the wastewater utilities perspective, which are critically important partners in helping us understand not just the logistics of wastewater surveillance and how to sustain it, but also how to interpret the data and nuances of such an environmental system. Through the Center of Excellence, our priorities are to develop wastewater surveillance as a public health tool, to make wastewater surveillance sustainable, and to support partners' trainings and skill developments for local, regional, and national partners. Next slide. I will pass it off to Angela.
Everyone, my name is Elizabeth, and I'll be presenting on the scientific basis behind why wastewater surveillance works for public health and what factors affect the data we receive and how we interpret it. So to start, like Guinevere just said, because we know that individuals with infectious diseases shed the viruses or bacteria that cause the disease into the wastewater, we can leverage that knowledge to use wastewater to track diseases spreading in communities. I want to start by quickly defining the word pathogen because we'll be using that word a few times. But a pathogen is a biological agent that causes disease, so that could be a virus, bacteria, or fungus that causes an infection and makes an individual sick. So when a disease is circulating in a sewer shed, as more and more people get sick and start shedding, more and more pathogen enters the wastewater treatment system. Through regular sampling each week, we can track changes in the pathogen concentrations over time. And for many of the diseases we track, we have at least some clinical data available as well. So we compare our wastewater concentrations to the clinical data that we have to ensure that the trajectory of wastewater concentrations aligns with what we know from case data. These plots show one example of what that looks like for a common respiratory virus called RSV. As you can see here, when we compare the number of RSV infections through clinical testing in a community, which is the plot on the left showing test positivity, to the concentration of RSV in the wastewater, which is the right-hand plot, the two data sets are highly aligned and correlated. This is really useful information for us, so we rely on plots like this when we do see unexpected changes in the wastewater concentrations, because we know from past experience that the wastewater concentrations are likely to actually reflect changes in the number of infections within a community. Next slide. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time diving into pathogen shedding and how that relates to our work. So we have some data from clinical studies on exactly how much individuals with infections shed the pathogen in their feces, urine, sputum, etc. These studies have shown us a few important things. For example, many pathogens are shed in very, very high quantities by individuals that are infected. In many cases, the shedding from one individual continues over the course of many days or weeks. We know that there's also quite a lot of variability between individuals in how much they shed and how long they shed. And there's also quite a lot of variability between the pathogens that cause different diseases. So to walk through some examples, on the left-hand plot, we can see some estimated SARS-CoV-2 shedding, which causes COVID-19. And on the x-axis, we can see the number of days since a person became symptomatic, and the y-axis shows the amount of virus shed each day. So this plot shows that even within a single virus, we have evidence that the shedding can really vary between variants of the virus. For example, the Omicron variant for COVID, which is the newest of the 3 shown here, may result in earlier shedding than some of the older variants. The middle plot shows shedding related to norovirus, which is a foodborne gastrointestinal illness, and this shows shedding rates from 5 different individuals over time. From this, we can see that between the individuals all continue to shed the virus for at least 2 weeks and probably longer. And from this, we can also see that even among 5 different people, there's quite a lot of variability. Some individuals appear to shed a lot more virus than others. And finally, the plot on the right shows flu and B viral shedding over time, and it's a similar dynamic to norovirus, where if you look at individual shedding, there's a lot of variability between individuals, and the shedding can continue for quite some time, perhaps even over 3 weeks. Because there's so much variability in the pathogen shedding between diseases, between individuals, variability within individuals over time, this means that it's very challenging to go from the data on the left here, which is wastewater concentrations of SARS-CoV-2, it's very hard to translate that into an estimate of the accurate number of people who are sick at any given time. In addition to shedding variability and uncertainty, there are many other environmental, population, and laboratory factors that affect the final concentration of a pathogen that we actually measure in the wastewater. So the plot on the left shows SARS-CoV-2 concentrations. If I wanted to calculate exactly how many people were sick with COVID-19 during a certain week in February, based off the wastewater data, I would need to take into account all of these different factors shown in bubbles here that affect the final measured concentration. And there are a lot of different factors that could affect it, including the chemical makeup of the wastewater, whether there is industrial effluent in the wastewater that may affect how well our laboratory test is able to detect a pathogen, population dynamics, how much people are moving in and out of a sewer shed, how much wastewater is produced per capita, which might affect how much a pathogen signal gets diluted, whether or not the pathogen breaks down and decays in the wastewater, making it harder for our test to pick it up, and then other sampling and laboratory factors. All of these variables and even more variables affect the final concentration that we see, and many of these factors are very difficult or impossible to measure, or we just don't have the resources to measure them effectively on a regular basis. So as much as we would love to look at the wastewater and say that X number of people are sick, we just don't have the information available to do that with any certainty. So given that, what can we do with the wastewater data? And the answer is we can do quite a lot with it. So even with all that uncertainty, our ability to track the wastewater concentrations over time has provided us with a wealth of information for public health. First of all, wastewater is very effective at tracking trends for pathogens that are abundant and regularly detected. Those would be stuff like flu, RSV, and COVID. Each week for each sewer shed in California, we can look at data from the past 2 or 3 weeks and fit that data into a trend model. This can help us understand where we are during a surge or where we are during respiratory virus season. For example, if it's midwinter and the concentration of flu in the wastewater starts to plateau and decrease, this is a sign that the season may have peaked and is now receding. Or in early fall, when we aren't sure when respiratory season is going to begin, we can watch the wastewater trends for flu and RSV, and if they start to go up, this is a good signal that we might be entering respiratory virus season. We can also use changes in the concentration to estimate how quickly a disease might be spreading. There's a disease metric in public health called effective reproductive number, or R effective, that estimates how rapidly a disease is spreading in a community. If the R effective is 1, the disease is holding steady. If it's greater than 1, the disease is spreading rapidly. And if it's less than 1, the disease is decreasing. This is a really valuable metric in public health, especially during outbreaks. And in areas where we don't have good clinical data, we've found that the wastewater can provide a robust estimate for R effective. We can also use the wastewater data to communicate how high or low current wastewater concentrations are. Since high and low are relative and subjective categories, we spent a lot of time looking at different ways to define thresholds and level categories using historical wastewater data. We have worked with both clinical and wastewater data to try to define wastewater levels such as low, moderate, high, and very high in a way that makes sense and is aligned with what we see on the clinical side. We have found wastewater levels to be particularly useful for communicating with the public, since it's a very straightforward way to try to communicate how many infections are in a community and what a person's risk might be for catching an illness. And then finally, there are some pathogens that we track that are not common and are not detected in most wastewater samples. For example, measles in California, when there are no known measles outbreak, we don't tend to see it in the wastewater, and for months at a time, most wastewater samples are totally negative for measles. So when it does pop up in the wastewater, this is a really helpful alert for us, and it's a signal that there could be measles cases in a community, even if we haven't picked it up in the clinical data. And this could be a signal that there's cases that haven't been identified yet, and then we can start working on communicating with healthcare providers and seeing if we can locate these cases and try to prevent any more transmission. So there are a lot of ways that we can use this data for public health. And in addition to that, the wastewater surveillance data also provides some distinct advantages compared to other forms of disease surveillance. One nice advantage is that it provides us with a community-wide and anonymous snapshot about local disease circulation within an entire community. Our wastewater samples sometimes represent hundreds or thousands or even millions of people. So we don't need to collect private health information from many, many individuals for this surveillance system to work. This is both a logistical benefit, since we're not trying to capture and collect disease data from many, many people, and a privacy benefit because the disease data that we do collect is fully anonymous, representing a whole community at a time. For example, this map here is showing current SARS-CoV-2 trends and levels in a sewer shed in California, where the wastewater sample represents around 1.4 million people. Having that high-level bird's eye view of whether COVID infections are increasing and what the current levels are is really useful for public health. Another logistical advantage of wastewater is we can use a single wastewater sample to test for many pathogens at the same time. So with one laboratory test, we can pick up flu and RSV and COVID, measles, mpox, and many of the pathogens that Guinevere was describing. This allows us to really efficiently track data for many diseases at once, rather than having to rely on different disease tracking systems for different diseases. Finally, we know that many diseases and communities might go unrecognized or unidentified. A common metaphor used in public health is the metaphor of an iceberg. You can see the tip of the iceberg of perhaps how much flu is in a community, for example, but that might only represent a small proportion of the total amount of flu infections in that community. Many people who are sick may be asymptomatic, or they may not go to a hospital or clinic if they have only mild symptoms or if the illness doesn't last very long, or they may not have access to testing or access to good clinical care. So wastewater surveillance helps us look beyond that tip of the iceberg of what we see through our clinical testing data and get a better idea of the total amount of disease in communities, regardless of whether or not there's adequate testing for every single person who's sick. And like I've mentioned before, this sort of bird's eye snapshot of the total disease in a community really helps us zoom out, see what trends are looking like, see if diseases seem to be going up or down, whether we're currently at a high level compared to historical levels or a low level. So all that information has been really beneficial for public health. And with that, I will pass it along to Angela. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, so next our team wanted to share how within public health we've been able to leverage the data that is generated by wastewater surveillance programs over the last several years to inform public health action, improve our disease surveillance, and our awareness. Over the last several years, wastewater surveillance has been able to improve our situational awareness. This is especially true when some of our other public data sources and data sets are either limited or when clinical testing is low or non-existent for a pathogen. Wastewater surveillance has been used to confirm and challenge trends that we're seeing in our other surveillance systems. It can also offer signals of disease activity, support predictive modeling, and enable variant detection. Wastewater surveillance also allows monitoring of pathogens that aren't routinely tested for in a community or may not be reported to us within public health. This information in turn has been able to guide public health actions, particularly at the local and county level. Wastewater data can support tailored messaging, raise public awareness. It can help healthcare providers and healthcare systems prepare for potential increases in disease. It can also inform resource planning. So think of anticipating needs for testing supplies, vaccines, boosters, screening tools, PPE, specific medications or therapeutics, particularly when we see wastewater concentrations increasing or when we see less than expected detections within wastewater. Over the past few years, public health has been able to leverage this data to guide our decisions and inform real-world responses. And so our team compiled a couple of specific use cases that really highlight how useful this data has been. Wastewater surveillance took the kind of modern spotlight as a promising tool during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we learned during this time was really clear. And that was that SARS-CoV-2 wastewater concentrations, which are shown in dark blue here, track really closely with reported case counts, which are plotted in yellow. And the two of them have strongly correlated over time. We did see a shift in pandemic strategy, and that was moving towards at-home antigen testing, which are generally not recorded by public health. And so there became this divergence between what wastewater was showing and what case counts were showing, with wastewater actually being a more accurate lens into underlying disease transmission than cases are, which Elizabeth just explained. During this time, we can see that wastewater indicated we had a much larger summer wave in 2022 for COVID than case data alone would have indicated. At times, we've even seen wastewater move first, jumping ahead of available clinical case data. This leading signal has provided early situational awareness for public health to be able to prepare for surges in some cases. Wastewater surveillance during the COVID-19 pandemic provided us with a robust, unbiased indicator of community infection, and this really set its stage for the application of wastewater surveillance beyond SARS-CoV-2. One key example of how adaptable and reactive wastewater surveillance can be was with the mpox outbreak, which was previously referred to as monkeypox. After the first US Mpox case was reported in May of 2022, our partners at Stanford and Emory universities developed and deployed a wastewater assay within just 4 weeks. Working with our Mpox response team here at CDPH, wastewater data gave us real-time visibility at a moment when we had just very few clinical cases that had been identified across the country, and Mpox hadn't even been declared an emergency. We already had our eyes on the wastewater data. Early wastewater detections revealed that we had much broader transmission than we had otherwise expected. That allowed us to escalate our state response. It allowed us to alert our counties and healthcare providers and clinicians. It helped guide vaccine and resource allocation at both the state and local levels. And it served as an important proof of concept for being able to use wastewater surveillance to rapidly respond to an emerging threat or public health need. Monitoring for Mpox continues today with more than 85 communities participating, and the heat maps here just show how widespread detections were in August of 2022 and how they started to decline to sporadic levels later that year. Wastewater remains an important sentinel surveillance tool and reminds us that Mpox transmission can continue even as testing or public attention for Mpox has decreased. As one county health officer stated, quote, "They had no active Mpox testing because no one thought it could be in their community. Wastewater gave them a window into what was actually going on." Norovirus is another great example of how wastewater data can be practically used to inform public health decision-making. Norovirus is the leading cause of foodborne illness in the United States, with most outbreaks being commonly associated with raw oysters and in common person-to-person outbreak settings, including restaurants, schools, child care centers, long-term care and skilled nursing facilities, and cruise ships. Even though norovirus is a very important disease and can cause major outbreaks, it's not a reportable disease. So that means that we have very limited public health surveillance data for norovirus. One of the reasons for this is that most people who get infected with norovirus won't end up getting tested, which can make it really hard to track and prevent and control norovirus outbreaks. Therefore, surveillance of noro has typically and historically relied on monitoring of lab-confirmed outbreaks and reports of gastrointestinal outbreaks with an unknown cause that are assumed to be norovirus but often never confirmed. So a specific example of how we've been able to leverage wastewater data to support norovirus is in 2023, a county in California had received reports of over 100 people who had what was identified as norovirus-like symptoms after dining at a restaurant. Unfortunately, at this time, very few clinical samples could be collected from the patrons of the restaurant. The restaurant was asked to shut down and ordered to clean with disinfectant products that had been approved for treating and disinfecting norovirus. This is a very aggressive approach and also requires that the restaurant shuts down. During this outbreak, while the county was waiting for clinical test results, the county thought, hey, let's turn to wastewater data. And then within days of the outbreak, the local wastewater results showed a rapid increase of norovirus concentrations. Using the wastewater data, the county operated under the presumption that the outbreak was due to norovirus, and eventually those clinical lab results confirmed this. This is a practical real-life example where local county partners were able to leverage wastewater data to support their outbreak investigation. And as their county public health epidemiologist stated, quote, "Wastewater detections help solidify what pathogen we were working with by giving us an early indication rather than waiting on specimen results, which helped guide our investigations and our interventions." And finally, the most recent example of how wastewater surveillance has adapted to emerging public health needs is with the application to monitor for measles. As you may have seen in the news, measles activity has been increasing. Measles, for background and context, is a highly contagious vaccine preventable disease. Measles causes disease in humans by direct contact with infectious droplets or airborne spread. So think an infected person coughing or sneezing. Those who are unvaccinated face the highest risk for severe illness and even death, and symptoms of measles can include a fever followed by cough, runny nose, pink eye, and rash. And those who are infected can spread measles for about 4 days before their rash starts and about 4 days after. And you may be thinking, why are we talking about this now? So here's a look at confirmed measles cases that have been reported in California over the last 10 plus years. Of note, this data was generated at the end of March, and we have already surpassed the number of measles cases that were reported in California for all of 2025. For context and background, wastewater monitoring for measles began in June of 2024 with a pilot program and study with our wastewater scan program, with the goal to better understand if wastewater could even be used to successfully monitor for measles virus and enhance public health efforts. During the initial pilot, 4 sites in California were selected to monitor for measles, and by the following year, in May 2025, this pilot expanded to 11 sites throughout California. Over the last year and a half, measles monitoring has now been added to all of the participating wastewater surveillance programs in the Cal Sewers network, and as of today, wastewater surveillance for measles occurs in all wastewater sites in the Cal Sewers network. This includes approximately 84 sites in total in 39 counties throughout California. And so how we've been able to use this data. So at the beginning of January of this year, our wastewater surveillance team was notified by wastewater scan of 3 consecutive wastewater detections that were positive for the measles virus in a sewer shed in California. Our team, once we found out about this, notified our immunization branch, or IZB team, who manages the measles cases and outbreaks for California, as well as notifying the county health department. Wastewater scan notified the wastewater utility at the same time. During this time, our IZB team had actually identified a positive measles case within the same sewer shed, with a rash onset at the beginning of January. This case that had been identified resided near the sewer shed of interest, but did not live within the sewer shed catchment boundary. So the thought was that this case could have possibly accounted for one or maybe some of these positive detections due to travel within the sewer shed. However, due to the fact that there were multiple consecutive positive wastewater detections day after day, the county was suspicious that there could be another concurrent case that was contributing to these detections. The county at the time had identified a case of low suspicion. However, due to the multiple consecutive wastewater detections, testing was conducted to test this individual, who was ultimately confirmed to be positive for measles. And the county stated, the recent measles wastewater detections in our county helped us identify our second measles case. This case was almost ruled out, but wastewater, among other conversations, helped encourage the county to test this individual, which ended up being the second confirmed case, measles case this year. So these are just a few examples that highlight how at the state level and together with our colleagues across California in local health jurisdictions, we've been able to translate the data generated from samples that many of your utilities and utilities across California provide into real-time public health action, including identifying cases, supporting outbreak investigation, raising public awareness, giving healthcare systems and providers advance notice, improving resource planning and allocation, and better anticipating changes in disease patterns. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Spencer.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela. Yeah, I think that is incredibly helpful to hear those stories of specifically how the data has been used to benefit our communities. So I am here to talk about why is wastewater surveillance important for wastewater agencies and wastewater operators. And the primary reason is we can utilize this information to help our communities. The collection and treatment of sewage and wastewater is at its core vital to health and preparing clean water. That is our mission, that is our goal, that is what we strive to do. In our main purpose, wastewater utilities are essential for protecting human health and the environment by treating sewage and preventing the spreads of disease, and ultimately protecting our environment from emerging contaminants and many other potential harms to our environment. And wastewater surveillance is a direct extension of that core service by helping provide very valuable data on what is spreading through our communities and helping our local public health officers prepare for these increased cases of infectious diseases. And ultimately, the the purpose of our work is to, help our communities treat sewage, make sure that our environment and our water is safe and clean, and ultimately protecting our communities from those harms. And wastewater surveillance is a direct continuation of that. And wastewater utilities are a vital partner in the Cal Sewers network. Without the wastewater providers, they would not have the sampling that they need to do all of this great work that you just heard about and all of these efforts that have been underway since, even before the pandemic, of being able to have this data, to correlate this data, use it to help our communities make sure that they are as prepared as possible for whatever is coming. The CalSewers network is used as a coalition between CDPH, the local public health officers, the academic institutions that help provide the information and the testing assays required, and the wastewater providers. Um, Oftentimes, for agencies that are involved on, boots on the ground, collecting the samples, mailing out the samples, as soon as the sample leaves, we don't really get an opportunity to hear what happened, what's going on with that. And that is the primary goal for why we wanted to do these webinars, is to help provide the wastewater operators and the wastewater utilities the information of how this information is being used and what benefit it is conveying on your communities. And without the sampling provided by the wastewater utilities, the network would not be nearly as strong as it is today. I know Stephanie is going to talk about up next the coverage and how much of California is truly covered by the the wastewater surveillance network. And it is truly impressive that we are able to have such participation, and we are always looking for more participation to see there's, always gaps, and we want to make sure that we can provide as much data as we can to help prevent the spread of these diseases. Wastewater treatment they're step one in this multi-stage operation to help prevent these large-scale outbreaks. And from what we saw in 2020, I'm sure a lot of you are shuddering at the thought of me talking about 2020. Clearly, this is something that is very helpful. It's something that provides not only retrospective data so we can look back and say what happened, but in the moment, they were doing live reports, telling people what's going on, communicating with local public health officers. And while we are not deep in the throes of a pandemic like we were then, there's, if something like that were to happen again, which, fingers crossed that we're out of the woods on that, having this infrastructure in place with the wastewater utilities as that vital partner is incredibly valuable. And so what does this mean for wastewater operators? And I'm sure, coming from CASA, and I'm sure CWEA would agree with me, wastewater operators play a vital role in this operation. Without the wastewater operators collecting the samples and doing their part for this, the network would not have the spread that it does. It's the data from the wastewater operators and the wastewater utilities that the program relies on. And so wastewater operators can help aid in the sampling process, aid in their participation, whether that's presenting information to your upper management, whatever it may be, without the wastewater operators having a foot in the door and a stake in the game. This, infrastructure that we have built over these last few years would not be nearly as strong as it is now. And with your agency's participation, you can be a part of this much larger statewide effort to protect Californians as a whole. Well, your treatment plant covers your local community. It, as was just described, it helps provide information on what's going on. If someone was traveling in with a disease, if something new is coming that we need to be prepared for. And so it helps not only protect people, but it also helps the rest of the world, because we will have valuable data that we can share and say, hey, this is coming, and it helps understand how these infectious diseases transmit. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Stephanie to talk about resources and how we can get connected.
Thanks, Spencer. I appreciate that.
Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie Birch-Murbach on the CDPH wastewater surveillance team. And today I just wanted to share some of the resources that we produce to support wastewater surveillance and how you can get involved or just get connected to learn more about the program or wastewater surveillance for public health overall. So to start, just wanted to share some of the resources that we make available to our partners and our utility collaborators and ways that you all can get engaged with our wastewater surveillance program. So we host a number of meetings and work groups, the first of which is our monthly Cal Sewers Network work group meeting. This call takes place on the first Monday of every month at 3 p.m. It involves all of our partners throughout the state, and it's really where we can share program updates and review data and trends for each of the regions and communities. We also lead a monthly wastewater surveillance office hours. That takes place the third Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. This is a standing work group meeting where we cover various topics and insights from perspectives of public health, laboratories, utility, academic partners, and really work to create a space so that we can ask questions from each other, share information, and learn from each other's experiences. I will say that these office hour meetings are also recorded, and then we make them available afterwards to everybody in our network so that they could either rewatch those recordings or maybe share with others on the team that weren't able to attend that meeting. Our team also provides a dedicated wastewater surveillance forum that's on our CDPH Microsoft Teams platform. And really, you can think of it like a link to a resource hub where our local health jurisdictions and utility partners can access those meeting recordings, other resources. You can post chats or questions to each other and kind of make it your own. But you can also see announcements, and then we have a whole host of document libraries that we share those resources, recordings, and then FAQs, infographics, things like that. And then we also provide virtual or in-person consultations and site visits. And really this is to help provide training or technical assistance, data interpretation, discuss programmatic updates and those impacts, and really to help share information to increase capacity for our partners. And apologies, I think the slides didn't quite translate, so there's a little overlap in the text. But I did also want to share that our team produces weekly reporting for COVID, flu, and RSV, and biweekly reporting for norovirus and Mpox. We share those with our local health jurisdictions and utility partners via email. We also have a public-facing dashboard on our CDPH website. The link is in the slide here, so I think you'll have access to the slides and you'll be able to click on the link, but I'll try to put those in the chat while I'm talking here too. But the public-facing dashboard includes data from various labs throughout California and includes information for influenza A, influenza B, the influenza A H5 subtype, RSV, and then COVID-19. We also have an online toolkit with infographics and FAQs that's available to download from our CDPH wastewater surveillance website. And it's really to be used as like informational resources. I'll also post that link in the chat too for you in just a minute here. And most recently, we just added our brand new California Wastewater Surveillance Center of Excellence website. And here you're going to be able to see an overview of our whole program and the Wastewater Surveillance Center of Excellence. There's going to be links to various dashboards that cover the different utility sites within our region. You'll have access to various resources such as guidances and tools. There's links to events and training, publications, and then FAQs about our program. And next, I really wanted to talk about how utilities can get connected, participate in wastewater surveillance, or just generally learn more. So right now, there's 3 major programs that operate in the state of California that provide wastewater surveillance programming. And for now, all three of these programs are operating or are either closed or operating at very close to capacity. So because of that, we are mainly focused on continuing to maintain the participation of the sites that have already begun or are already participating in the network. And that really helps us to ensure continuity in the data. It avoids disruptions in long-term trend monitoring and helps to sustain those relationships. But I did want to mention that kind of depending on the program, there is sometimes a very limited opportunity to bring on an additional site, maybe one or two. But in those rare cases, it generally happens like on a case-by-case basis. And usually when there's a very strong public health justification, or there's a public health need, or just capacity at that local level that's being called out. But I did want to mention that to help expand some access where possible, CDPH is also supporting county-led wastewater surveillance programs. So in some cases in counties, they've been able to actually initiate wastewater surveillance programs within their own public health county lab. And they have the flexibility to add these programs into the programming. So depending on where you're located, there might be some local options at the county level that we can help explore together. However, if you're interested in participating or just want to understand what's possible, our team is always happy to connect with you and just talk about available resources, discuss local programs or technical support. And even if we can't add a new site immediately, we can at least walk you through the landscape, discuss future opportunities, and connect you with our networks. And so if you are interested in that or just want to get more information about wastewater surveillance in general, please feel free to reach out to our team at wws@cdph.ca.gov. And so finally, we just wanted to wrap up with where our program is heading. We gave you the overview, what it's doing, where we're, what our capacity is right now, the resources that we create. And so now we just want to end with where are we going into the future and what are our plans for that? So our program's main goal is to work towards the sustainability of a wastewater surveillance program that in turn strengthens our public health preparedness and response, which in turn, and what we're always hoping for, is to create a stronger, healthier California. So first, much of our work is to continue our routine testing. But we know that we need to strengthen our public health preparedness, especially for emerging pathogens or outbreaks. Those always remain a constant challenge for us. Most recently, we've been able to deploy wastewater surveillance for monitoring of H5N1 or avian flu during the emergency response last year. And as Angela mentioned previously, we're also using it to monitor for measles in our state now. So our goal is to ensure that we have those systems in place and that we can detect and respond as quickly as possible. Preparedness also means planning for large-scale events. So we're thinking like FIFA and World Cup that's taking place later this summer. We want to be able to better understand disease activity due to either international travel or mass gatherings. And so our hope is that by leveraging wastewater surveillance and other surveillance tools, we can better understand and monitor trends and just have that better situational awareness so that we can act accordingly, act quickly, and have a very robust local response. Second, we are focused on increasing efficiency while reducing gaps. So one example is how wastewater surveillance for COVID, it's allowed us to move away from that individual case reporting and reduce the need for extensive sequencing. So that shift really saves resources while still providing robust population level data. Well, we're also strategically adding new pathogens to our surveillance pathogen panel and ensuring that we're monitoring for the right threats without overextending our capacity. And finally, we're working to build the wastewater surveillance community in California and beyond. We plan to do this through continued training and leadership through our Center of Excellence. That's where we're fostering collaboration within California with other states in our region. We plan to share best practices, learn from others, and then continue to strengthen that network of professionals who make this work possible. So together, through these efforts of preparedness, efficiency, and community building, we really hope to position ourselves to respond more effectively to public health challenges in California. And I think, yeah, I will pass this back over to Spencer to open it up for Q&A.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you all so much for all of your presentations. I have a list of a couple of the questions that have been asked in the chat in the Q&A box. I will start us off with the question in the Q&A box from Denise. Has the group experienced pushback from the public or other entities on wastewater surveillance? And if so, how do you respond to that? So I'm not sure who wants to tackle that one. Fun first question.
I can kick it off and then I welcome anyone else from the team. I think we've definitely had some questions about that. I will say for the most part, we've had mostly supportive, understanding uses for wastewater surveillance for public health. I think a lot of the support comes from the fact that the data is anonymous. We're able to test for a large community population without having to rely on access to healthcare or healthcare settings. So generally, it's been a positive response. But I think in those situations where there has been some pushback, it's come down to education and working with the public to kind of understand what their hesitation is, what their concerns are, and helping to address those, and even if needed, adjust some of our reporting or reporting styles so that we can better meet their needs and connect with them at their level.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. I know we're coming up on time here, so the next question that I saw is, has anyone detected the new variant BA.3.2 cicada yet? And I will pass that off to our epidemiologists because I do not know.
Okay, I can take that one. Yeah, as of our weekly report last week, which went out on Friday, we'd only detected this variant in 2 wastewater samples in the past month, and in both samples it was extremely low concentration. I think the estimate across all California wastewater samples is that it represents less than 1% of the current COVID going around. So we have been watching this one, of course, from the news and everything, but we haven't seen any evidence that it's increasing in the wastewater right now.
Awesome. And somewhat related, are there any plans to include HMPV in the future?
Assuming that's human metapneumovirus, the wastewater scan program does track this in California. I don't think we have plans to add it to our state lab list, just given other pathogen priorities. Of course, we'd like to track everything. But yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, others, but I don't think we have immediate plans to add it.
Awesome. The next question is, what is the minimum concentration of a disease that needs to be present in wastewater for it to be considered a community outbreak?
I don't mean to hug the mic, but it's kind of disease dependent. So for diseases like flu and RSV and COVID, which are honestly pretty common, we see surges, but they're common diseases. We've calculated baselines to kind of understand what low level signal looks like, since we tend to just see it in most wastewater samples. So for those, we're mostly looking at if we've gone above a baseline, which kind of indicates that activity is elevated. And then if we see consistent increases week over week, that could indicate a surge or an outbreak. With other diseases like measles that we just don't expect to see, for those, even one detection puts us on edge. And then if we start to see consistent detections over and over the course of weeks, especially if the detections continue past the normal infectious period for one individual, then we do start to get pretty suspicious about an outbreak. And that would be similar for Mpox or anything that's a little bit less common. So it's really kind of all relative and disease specific.
Are there any indicators within the wastewater sample that can indicate population/number of people in one sewer shed? I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that one. I would say that the typically the way that they indicate the number of people in the sewer shed is through the taking the service area and seeing what the census data is for that area is the way that they calculate how many people are in that. Um, I don't believe there's any indicators that they can take from the sample that would indicate how many people that is representative of. I think that's kind of external data.
Yeah, we have some normalizing variables. There's one called PMMOV, which is a plant virus that's common in people's diet. And so that gets shed and it gives you like an idea, but it wouldn't be able to translate directly to the number of people contributing in a simple way.
Awesome. And I know we have two additional slides that are just acknowledgments of all of our partners with the program. And so we just wanted to take this opportunity to express our huge thanks and appreciation for all the different parties involved. It takes a village. And our last slide is acknowledgements to all of our utility partners who are engaged in this program. We greatly appreciate all of you, and we appreciate all of you for being here today. Before we close out, I will let Nick do his housekeeping from the bottom now.
Yes, thank you again. Thank you again to all of our amazing speakers, and thank you again for this great collaboration with CDPH and CASA. So we really appreciate that. I did attach or did include just the process for claiming the contact hours. There'll only be one attention check code for this webinar, so there's not two. So there's one attention check code that attention check code was displayed a little bit earlier. But if anyone has any issues with it, please do feel free to reach out to me directly or to membership at CWEA, member services at CWEA.org. We'll make sure that everyone gets that information. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you
Thanks
all.
again.
Thank you.
Thanks all.